Welcome to the Right Science Daily Revision Boost. First thing, a big well done and congratulations to our top 3 scorers from day 2, which are Izzy, Fatima and Ben. Well done, let's see if you can do it again today. The formula we need to learn today is that for kinetic energy. So kinetic energy measured in joules is 0.5 times the mass in kilograms times the speed squared. The biology blast for today is about plant transport systems. So the first one of these is xylem tissue, and water is transported in xylem, WXY. So the xylem will transport the water and mineral ions from the roots up all through the stem to the flowers and the leaves. Water will enter by osmosis and the mineral ions are taken up by active transport. We need to know a few facts about our xylem. It's made from dead cells that have no end walls between them, and it's got lignin that thickens the cell walls to provide support. The second plant transport tissue is phloem, and this is going to transport the dissolved sugars that are made in photosynthesis in a process called translocation. So the sugars will be taken to places like the meristems, which is where they're used to make new cells, or to the roots where they can be stored. Few things we need to know about phloem. They're made of living cells. The end walls become sieve plates, so there's still end walls, just little holes in them, and the sugars can pass through those sieve plates. If we consider the vascular bundles of the plants, this is the mixture of the xylem and the phloem tissue, and the location of the vascular bundle is going to help provide support for the plant. So in the leaf, they form a network to support the soft tissue. In the stem, it's around the outer edge to provide the support, and in the root, it's in the centre to let the root bend. The next thing we need to look at is the process of transpiration. So transpiration is the loss of water vapour from the aerial parts of the plant or the leaves. The transpiration stream is the movement of water from the roots through the xylem and out of the leaves. And we need to remember that the water is entering our plant through the root hair cells by osmosis. Then it travels to the xylem tissue and it can be transported throughout the plant. On the surface of our leaves we have this structure called the stomata, which allows carbon dioxide to diffuse into the plant, and the opening and closing of the stomata is controlled by the guard cells. So when they're open, the water is able to evaporate from the cells inside the leaf into the air spaces, and then we get a concentration gradient between the inside and the outside of the leaves, so water vapour will move down the concentration gradient and diffuse out of the plant into the air. As we lose water from the leaves, the pressure in the xylem vessels in the leaf is reduced, which means that water then moves up through the xylem from the area of high pressure to the area of low pressure, so from the roots to the leaves. If the plants need to reduce water loss because they're in very hot areas, for example, then they have this thick waxy cuticle on the surface. We need to know about 4 factors that affect transpiration. First one, temperature. Increasing the temperature increases evaporation rates, so transpiration increases. Air movement is a second, so that as air moves over the surface of the leaf, the evaporated water molecules are moved away, increasing the concentration gradient, so more water diffuses out of the leaf. The third factor is the light intensity, so the stomata open in the light and close in the dark, so if we increase the light intensity, more water will evaporate because more stomata are open. But there is a maximum rate because the stomata will all be open at some point, which means it can't increase further. Final factor is humidity, which is just about the amount of water present in the air. Decreasing the humidity creates a steeper concentration gradient, leading to faster diffusion of water out of the leaf. Hopefully you still remember today's daily formula for kinetic energy, measured in joules, is 0.5 times the mass in kilograms times the speed squared. Today's chemistry check, we're going to look at electrolysis. So when we're talking about electrolysis, this is the process that splits chemicals using electricity. So we pass an electric current through a compound, causing a chemical change. To actually carry this out, we're going to need two electrodes made of metal or graphite. They conduct the electricity to the electrolyte. We need the electrolyte, which is a compound in a liquid state or solution, and we need the electrical supply, a power pack for example. You need to remember that the negative electrode is called the cathode, the positive electrode is the anode, and then the positive ion is the cation, the negative ion is the anion. When we talk about a binary ionic compound, this is one made of just two elements, hence binary, bi meaning two. So to give you the example of lead bromide, the cathode produces the lead because lead makes positive ions, and the anode produces the bromine because bromide are negative ions. So what we find here is you've got to add two electrons to the lead to make our lead atoms, and our bromide ions have to lose an electron each to make bromine gas, which always goes around as a diatomic molecule. When we're selecting our electrode, we use inert electrodes because they're not changed in electrolysis. So we use unreactive metals like copper or platinum or graphite. If we're talking about something that's in an aqueous solution, is dissolved in water, and water is partially ionized. So that means it's got small concentrations of hydrogen and hydroxide ions. So that if we've got our aqueous solution, what we see is the situation at the bottom. So we've got 4 hydrogen ions, which will gain 4 electrons, one each, to make 2 molecules of hydrogen gas. And then our hydroxide ions will form our water molecules, oxygen gas, and release 4 electrons. When we're working out what's made at the anode and what's made at the cathode, we've got to remember a couple of rules. First one, hydrogen is always produced at the cathode unless ions from a less reactive metal are present, so they're the ones under hydrogen on the right, and oxygen is produced at the anode unless ions from an element in group 7 are present. When we talk about electroplating, this uses non-inert electrodes, so these ones will change, and that's important. In electroplating, the cathode is the object we want to coat, the anode is the metal we want to coat it with, and the electrolyte is a solution containing ions of the coating metal. So what we find is the metal ions from our electrolyte are discharged on the surface of our object, and that means they cover the surface. We can also use electrolysis for purifying copper. So the anode is impure copper, the cathode pure copper, and the electrolyte is copper sulfate solution. So the cathode gains copper atoms and therefore increases in mass. The anode loses copper atoms and decreases in mass, and the impurities from the anode collect underneath as sludge. Our last use of electrolysis is to extract aluminium. First thing, we dissolve the aluminium oxide in cryolite to lower the melting point. We then put that into our electrolysis cell. We've got our carbon anode and cathode there. Oxygen will form at the anode, which then reacts with the carbon of our actual electrode to make carbon dioxide, and aluminium is produced at the cathode. Because our aluminium ions are positive, Al3+, they gain 3 electrons to make aluminium atoms, whereas at the anode, oxygen ions, so O2-, are then going to form oxygen gas and release 4 electrons. And don't forget, today's daily formula is kinetic energy in joules is 0.5 times the mass in kilograms times the speed squared. Today's physics prep is looking at the first part of P3 on static and circuits. Protons have a positive charge, electrons a negative charge, but an atom is neutral because the positive and negative charges are of the same number, so they cancel each other out. When we rub 2 insulators together, electrons can be transferred from one to the other. It's only electrons that move, remember. So one object ends up with extra electrons, making it negatively charged, and the other object has more protons than electrons, so it's positively charged. And once we've got these charged materials, then opposite charges will attract and like charges will repel. When we've got a charged object or particle, then it has an electric field around it. So that when we place another charged object in that field, then it will either be attracted or repelled depending on the charges. If we place another object in an electric field that has its own charge, then the field lines stretch. So the force on an object will be the same direction that causes the field lines to shorten and straighten. And the closer the field lines are, the stronger the field is. When we refer to electric current, this is the rate of flow of charged particles or electrons. In order to make that current flow, we need some kind of a power supply, a cell, a battery, or one that plugs into the mains. Your circuit must be complete, and the current anywhere in a single closed loop is the same. So wherever you place an ammeter, same reading. The last bit we're looking at today in our physics prep are the circuit symbols. Because you might be asked to draw circuit diagrams, you need to make sure that you know all of the ones listed here. So create some flashcards and go through them, but obviously key things to notice: any kind of a resistor starts off with a rectangle and then it's got arrows or lines through it depending on what type it is. Ammeters and voltmeters, circle with an A or a V in. Your lamp, a circle with a cross in. Your diode is the triangle going into a line, and your light emitting diode exactly the same, just with two arrows pointing out to represent our light. When you're drawing any kind of a cell, the long line is the positive and the short line is the negative. Final reminder of our daily formula: kinetic energy in joules is 0.5 times the mass in kilograms times the speed squared. Now we've had a quick recap, then head on over to socrative.com and test your knowledge on the topics from today. The room name you need to enter is Right 2662. Good luck! If you want to know more about any of the topics we've covered in today's Daily Booster, then biology you can find on our B2 playlist, the chemistry is on the C3 and C6 playlist, and the physics is the P3 playlist.